All right, everybody, if we can find our way back to our seats, the next session will begin in 30 seconds. I don't know. Just as soon as we can all get back to our seats, the next session looks quite aquatic.
All right. Am I on? Wait. Okay, good. Excellent. All right. Well, let's get started on the second talk. I'm just going to be transparent to you. This one's probably the longest talk. But it's chock full of global flood goodness. Okay? This little card is back on the back table over there. I forgot. I held it the whole time in the beginning. I never told you what it was. Apparently, you just felt like I had to hold something. So this is our podcast. So, like I said, you can remember 10% of what I say, but you can actually go onto YouTube and get on our podcast. All the stuff about designed adaptability, Dr. Galuza's original concepts. They discuss how natural selection is an idolatrous worldview. That, honestly, no evolutionist really understands natural selection. And this is, let me explain that. For people who are not in the whole evolutionary world, you hear that and you say, no, we know what natural selection is. There's a definition in Webster. But when you go back and actually read the studies, evolutionists themselves do not agree on and do not understand what natural selection is. They will literally say, we don't fully understand what this is. So-and-so is using this as a concept that is not explainable, that does not actually fit what they're trying to say. And so a lot of when a speaker talks about, hey, evolutionists don't say this or they don't understand that, it's because we've gone back and read their studies in their own words, and that's what we're saying. And so if you go to Creation Live, they actually do a whole 2 or 3 talks on how natural selection is an idolatrous worldview, and they go back and give you quotes from evolutionists themselves. Did I speak English there? Evolutionists themselves, and show you what they're talking about. So check those out. You can grab those cards and subscribe to us online. Okay? All right. So we are going to engage in the global flood now. And I know for anybody who doesn't believe in creation, it's like, oh, the global flood. Okay? So, and here's the thing. This is what I think is so key. As a creationist, what I do is I speak on things, and then I get people who say, hey, that's a lie. And I say, what's a lie? And usually they say, that whole Jesus thing. And I say, show me a paper where what I'm saying is wrong. And they usually walk away. Because they really don't have a study, they don't have a paper, they don't have anything. Same thing is true. When we do Q&A, I will be the first one to tell you, I don't know. If I don't know something, I'm not going to try and fool you. I'll say, I don't know, but I work with 6 PhDs that are an email away, and I'll get you an answer on that, okay? So don't worry. I will get you an answer. But I'm also the first one to tell you that, hey, if you've got something that you say, hey, this whole creation thing is bunk, then I'm going to say, well, show me a study. Show me the evidence. And that irritates some people because they've been indoctrinated. They believe this so much that it's not so much a science thing, it's a belief thing, and they can't believe that you're telling them that they're wrong. And so that's why I always go back to the study. Go back to the science, go back to the study. Okay? There is some inference that you have to do. The truth is that when we look at the evidence, there's no smoking gun. You realize evolution doesn't have a smoking gun. Creationists don't have a smoking gun. All we can do is look at the evidence, line it up with the two, creation and evolution, and see which one fits better. That's all we can do. All right? And so that's what I do, is I show you the evidence, and then technically it's up to you to decide which one it lines up better with. If you walk away and you think it still lines up better with evolution, I mean, that's your deal. You know? I mean, clearly I think you're wrong. But that's not... But I still love you. I still love you. Okay? So, we're going to talk about the global flood. I recently actually went to the Grand Canyon. I got to go to the Grand Canyon. My job is awesome because I get to go to cool places and I get to tell people about God's Word, and I get to tell them that Jesus loves them. And, you know, it's like I don't know what else you can do. So, it's just an awesome job. So, I went to the Grand Canyon with Dr. Thomas and then Dr. Hebert. Dr. Hebert is our physicist. Dr. Thomas is our paleobiochemist. And so he did his dissertation in soft dinosaur tissue. And so if we talk about, I'll talk about dinosaurs a little bit. I don't remember if I get into soft dinosaur tissue in our Dinosaurs in Noah's Ark. But if not, you can come to Carluke. We'll be talking about dinosaurs, and we'll be talking about that there. So the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is this really cool history of the Earth. Because basically, I'm standing here. Now, I'm on the second floor. But if I was standing on the ground, I can't look down into the ground, right? But in the Grand Canyon, I can stand on the south rim, and I can see down through the multiple layers of strata, through the multiple layers of sediment, okay? All right? And so then I can say, hey, that's a history of the Earth. Now, the question is, what does that history say? When you look at this is a really cool, huge picture. Hopefully my thing works. Nope, it doesn't work on the TV. So you have all these layers down here. There's one layer that conventional scientists tell you was not laid down by water. Here's the kicker. What they're saying is all the other layers are laid down by water. How do we know that? Because the way they're laid down, it's sediment, and we find marine fossils in them. Pretty good hint, okay? But there's one that they... Sure. So most conventional scientists say that all of those layers were laid down by water except for one. Why do they say all the other layers were laid down by water? It's because, number one, we can tell based off cross-bedding and different ways the sediment is laid down. And then also they have marine fossils in them. So that's a good hint that it's laid down by water. There's one that they say is not laid down by water, and that's this one. It's the Coconino Sandstone. And they say that one was laid down by wind. So when we went to the Grand Canyon, we went and actually found evidence that it was laid down by water. And I'll show that to you here in just a minute. So we're going to be talking about the rocks cry out of a global flood. And it's interesting because I go through the same thing. Go back to the science. Go back to the actual evidence. Because the global flood seems like this big, amorphous, just Bible story. And it's like, man, but if I go back to the actual observable evidence, it starts to make sense. We'll talk about 4 different things. We'll talk about the flood in the Bible, the flood in history, the flood in the ground, and the flood in geological time. So we're going to talk about that radioisotope dating, which is really key for creation. Okay? Let's start out with the Bible and the flood. What does the Bible actually say about the flood? Because if you're like me, when I was young, when I was little, okay, I was very cute, all right? When I was little. You didn't have to laugh at that. I really was cute. Hold on, I have proof. Don't worry. But when I was young, I was in Sunday school, and I was taught this was Noah's Ark, right? Like this is the little animals are happy, everybody's smiling, they're stuffed in there, right? Is that what the Bible tells us about Noah's Ark? No, that's not what it tells us. See, this is me. I told you I was cute. See? I don't know what happened. And no, I don't want to talk about it. All right. So that's me, and that's my sister right there. She's not as cute, okay? Don't tell her that. Don't tell her that. I said that. She's pretty. She's nice. She's very nice. So when I was little, we learned that. And this was me, my church, Graham, Texas, First Baptist Church, Graham, Texas. This is our auditorium. My grandfather was the janitor. He cleaned the church and fixed stuff. Like I would go there over the summers, and I would basically mop and sweep and vacuum and help him. And then when we got done, after a couple of days, we would go around to the little old ladies of the church, and we would mow their lawns. So it was a cool summer. And so this auditorium is actually a lot smaller than I remembered it when I was a little kid. So my sister and I would actually have races. We would start at the back, very spiritual, very spiritual. We would start at the back, and we would crawl under the pews to see who could get to the front first. And so that was my spiritual upbringing. But anyway, this is, I don't even know why I talk about that, but it's fun. So this is the Noah's Ark that we were taught in school, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, right? And when you're a little kid, you're like, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, that's a lot. And then you live in Scotland, and you're like, that's not a global flood, that's Tuesday, okay? But let's go back and look at what the Bible actually says about water, not just the flow. What does it say about water? The first time we hear about water, it's Genesis 1 and 2. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Conventional scientists today want to know where all the water came from. They don't understand where the water came from. They think maybe it was on meteorites. There's like little droplets on meteorites. They found hey, we found this meteorite. There's like little bitty droplets of water. What if over millions and billions of years, all these meteorites hit Earth, and eventually all those little droplets started to add up into these oceans? 75% of our Earth is covered by water, but they think it's meteorites. But here, the Bible actually says the water is here the whole time. When God created, it was covered with water, and the Spirit was hovering over it. The water's been here for a while. What happens? It's been moved around. We have huge reservoirs of water underground. What happens if you move the water underground? What happens? You see the land, right? So the water's been moved around for a long time. Same thing we see is when the land came into being or came to be seen. It says, then God said, let the waters and the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And so the next thing that happens is like this big cataclysmic thing. Anybody think of something that happened with water right after that? It would be the what? The flood, the global flood. That's right. So here's the question. We're going to play a little game. There's no prizes, just so you know that. I'll give you some water or something. The question is, what does the Bible say? So the first question is, not just what does the Bible say, but how long was the flood? You have three options. You can say 40 days and 40 nights, 150 days, or 1 year. You don't have to get out. Just lock in your answer so you have it, and then we're going to take a look what the Bible actually says about it. So Genesis 7:11 says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were open. Two things about this verse that I want to point out to you. Number one, why is there a date there? That seems random, unless God really wanted you to know when the flood was and how long it was. I'll show you. We can actually do math from the Bible. Anybody who really likes math in here? Anybody? A couple people. Okay, excellent. I was not. That was the only subject I failed in school, but that's okay. I checked with the PhD. They said this is correct. Okay. So the second thing I want to point out to you is this. It says, the fountains of the great deep burst forth. That term, burst forth, in the original language is the same word they use when it says Moses parted the Red Sea. So something's opening up. Something's ripping apart. There is a lot of movement. And you guys know about like earthquakes and tsunamis. It happens when like the place just kind of barely move a little bit. Can you imagine if something's being ripped apart, what would be happening? Really bad stuff that you don't want to mess with, okay? So if we continue on, there was none of those answers there. That's just the very beginning. But here we go. We get one of the answers. And rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now the flow was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. So there's our 40 days and 40 nights. But that's not the answer, okay? What about 150? It says this, so he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both men and cattle, creeping thing, and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. There's 150 days. But they're not at the ark yet, are they? So it can't be 150 days. Man, we got to keep going. In Genesis, what was it, 8, 14, 15, it says, and it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked. And indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then God spoke to Noah, you'll recognize this, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wives and his sons' wives with him. So we can do some quick math and understand that it started the 600th year, second month, 17th day. They actually left the ark the 601st year, second month, and 27th day. So it was actually just over a year. That changes from what most of us are taught. Understand that when at ICR, we have this Discovery Center. We spent $35 million to create an entire Discovery Center. It has a planetarium. It's got like animatronic dinosaurs. A T-Rex is 3 stories high, all kinds of stuff. It's really cool. I got to speak to the Gideons, over 200 kids through 5 sessions, and I asked every single one of them, how long was the flood? Every single one of them, except for one, said 40 days and 40 nights. What we're about to talk about that happened in the global flood can't happen in 40 days and 40 nights based off this stuff, based off what we're looking at, okay? We have to understand what the Bible actually says about the flood in order for it to make sense, okay? So it was just over a year. Now here's a good question. Was it really a global flood? I mean, because there's ministries out there who want you to believe that it was a local flood, right? There's lots of local floods, but it wasn't some global flood, okay? As a matter of fact, you can go around to a lot of museums. This is here in Austin, or there in Austin, Texas, where I used to live. This is the Texas Natural History Museum. And in that Natural History Museum, it has a mosasaur, which is a swimming reptile, basically. It's not a dinosaur. Everybody likes to say mosasaurs are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, by definition, are animals that have hips, and their legs come straight down. Lizards and reptiles have arms that splay out like that. So a dinosaur is actually an animal that walks on the ground, has hips, and has legs underneath it. So that means the pterosaur and mosasaur, plesiosaur, all these things aren't really dinosaurs. They're reptiles that live in the same time frame, right? Okay, which wasn't millions of years, but they're not dinosaurs. So they have a mosasaur here in this museum, and they have this next to it. But beginning about 545 million years ago, a shallow sea covered central and west Texas. Much of Texas remained underwater for the next 400 million years. Do you realize I can go to any state and I can find that same sign? Not about Texas, but they'll say, hey, this area used to be covered in water. And then I go to the next day, hey, this area used to be covered in water. I've done it. I've gone to these places. But nobody connects the dots to say, hey, there was a global flood. No, it's all these little local floods, right? Why don't they want to say it's a global flood? Somebody yell it out.
They'd have to believe the Bible.
Wait, say it again?
They'd have to believe the Bible.
They'd have to believe the Bible, right? So if there was a global flood, it gives credence to what the Bible says. And if the Bible is true, what else is true? It means that we're sinners. It means that we have to rely on Jesus Christ for our sins, to forgiveness of our sins, right? So we have to remember that we don't want there to be a global flood, or these people don't want there to be a global flood because, remember, they will not allow a divine foot in the door. And that would be a huge divine foot in the door if they admit to a global flood. So was it really a global flood or was it a local flood? You can lock in your answers there. Well, I'm just going to ask you 3 simple questions. Number 1, if it was a local flood, why didn't God just tell Noah to move? It took him over 100 years to build the ark. Now, I have moved recently. I moved from Austin to Dallas. It was one of the most horrific experiences of my life, okay? I hate moving. But if I had 100 years, pretty sure it'd be easy, okay? So why in the world, if this was a local flood, didn't God just say, hey, Noah, I need you to move to this place over here? Wouldn't make sense. It had to have been a global flood. If it was just a local flood, why did Noah have to take the birds on the ark? Because to tell you this, birds can fly a lot faster and a lot farther than any of us can walk. So it would have been easy for them to get out of the way. The only reason they would have had to have been on the ark is if it was a global flood. And last but not least, if you go back to the Word of God, so why did God use words like all, whole, and every if it was a local flood? Right? Let me just remind you of that. Let's just look at it, because sometimes it helps to just go back and look at it. It says, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life. All that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the earth, were on the face of the ground, both men and cattle, creeping thing, and bird of the air. God wasn't like ambiguous, was he? He was pretty specific. It's kind of like the word day in Genesis 1. In Genesis, first chapter 1, it says the morning and the evening was the first day. The morning and the evening was the second day. The morning and the evening was the third day. Like God knew that we were going to be like, I wonder what a day is. So he was like, well, let me tell you. It was a morning and an evening, okay? And yet we still argue what a day is, even though he defines it in the same sentence, right? Okay? So same thing with this. God's not ambiguous. He tells us exactly what it was. And so it was a global flood. Let me ask you this. What would be happening during a year-long catastrophic event? Understand this would be a catastrophic event. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanism. I mean, you think about it. Today we have plates that are moving. Plates are continually subducting and abducting. We have parts where we're actually creating new ocean floor as we speak. There's ocean ridges and all kinds of stuff. When plates slide against one another, we get massive tsunamis, we get earthquakes. We get this all the time. Can you imagine, like I said before, if they used the same language, burst forth, that something was ripped apart or opened up, separated, what kind of things would be happening there? You would be getting massive earthquakes. You would be getting tsunamis that would make the Japan tsunami look like kids' play. This is actually CCTV from Japan's tsunami. Okay? Most people, you see the water just kind of going under the bridge. You don't realize the power of it. But these tsunamis destroy things, okay? Not only do we get the earthquakes, we get the tsunamis, you would have volcanism. So not only would you have volcanoes going off, shooting ash and everything into the air that would have covered everything, but you would also have the liquid rock coming up in the ocean. And so there's actually Dr. Clary, he's our geologist, he actually has done a whole study on the new sea floor that was created. So when you actually look at how the new sea floor is created through these ridges, it comes up, and what it does when this new lava comes up, it pushes up and out. Now what would happen if your ocean floor went up and out? All your water goes like this, right? It goes up onto the land. And what we're going to find here in a minute is that conventional scientists say that there were 6 mega floods. And Dr. Clary said, wait a second, 6 mega floods? Well, if they all happened in 1 year, that would be 6 mega sequences to the global flood. And that's exactly what he's found in the sediment. He has done sedimentation analysis, and I'll show you that here in just a little bit. So all 3 of these things will be happening. You're talking about multiple earthquakes, multiple tsunamis, multiple volcanoes going off. And with these mega sequences, what it means is you would have this stuff, and then it would subside a little bit, then it would come back again, subside a little bit. Here's the really scary part. Most people think of the global flood as something that happened really fast. Boom, everything's covered with water, everybody's just dead. When you think about this 6 mega sequences and people are running to get away, as it comes up on the land, there's some animals and humans that are getting away. And as it comes up further, they're watching their death come to them. That's a really sad part. That's a really scary thing. The other thing is that it's interesting, and we'll talk about this here in just a little bit, is that even in God's punishment, he provides. You think about it. The global flood is actually a beautiful window into our past in the sense that we can now know that the Bible is true. He gives us a window into the past. And at the same time, during his punishment, he was actually providing for us. Because guess where all the oil and coal came from? It's vegetation. It's algae. And how do you get miles thick seams of coal? You can't do that. The only thing that would do that would be a global flood that would be smashing everything together and burying it in sediment. It's the perfect answer to the coal seams that we find. Okay? It's the observable evidence. So God not only punishes, he provides a window and he provides provision. So this truly is a year-long cataclysmic event that changed the face of the earth forever. We really should no longer talk about the global flood as 40 days and 40 nights. We should be teaching what the Bible tells us, that it was a year-long catastrophic event that changed the face of the earth forever. That's what the Bible says. What about history? When you think about the flood in history, we think about, there's people that talk about the flood. Yeah, there's stories that people tell, right? These are a few artifacts. There's the Dead Sea Scrolls that talk about the biblical account. That's currently in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. There's the Gilgamesh Flood Tablet. Some of you may have heard that. Like, the Bible copied the Gilgamesh Flood Tablet. And so that one's actually currently in the British Museum in London. One point is, just because somebody wrote it down first doesn't mean they knew about it first, right? Now, here's the question. How do you have all these different stories? Because honestly, every culture has a flood story. Just about every culture. Like over 300 flood accounts. Over 300, okay? And so there's an evolutionist who thought, everybody has a flood story. So he said, this is a perfect excuse, or this is a perfect example of how it's all false. He says, yet tales of the flood spring from many sources. Myriad ancient cultures have their own legends of watery cataclysm and salvation. He says, before Noah, myths of the flood are far older than the Bible. He's like, yeah, I gotcha. Think about it this way. When you had cultures and you had tribes and things like this, they have these people, some are called shamans, some are called elders, and they are the people that are honored to tell the stories of their people. They are the history keepers. They are the people who are revered to be able to tell you their history. Do you really think that this guy was sitting around and thought, man, if only I had a flood story, then I could be really cool? You really think that's what he was thinking? No. Why? Why would he want to make up a story when some of his people would know that it's false? He wants to give the history of his people. So here's a good question. Why wouldn't their stories be the same, though? Because what the guy was saying, the evolutionist was saying, is a lot of these stories are different. It's a good question. Why are they different? Well, think of it this way. First of all, none of these people lived through it. So when you talk about the flood, only 8 people walked off the ark, right? And so all these people, all these cultures were split up at the Tower of Babel, which we're going to be talking about next, okay? They're split up and separated. So they're actually telling a story secondhand from Noah. It's very, very possible that Noah was alive at that time, or very close to that time, okay? So they did not live through it, so they don't actually know the full details of it. Here's another one. They worship different gods. Why would that matter? Well, when they got split up at the Tower of Babel, and they weren't worshiping God of the Tower of Babel, just so you know that, I'm sure you probably realize that. They weren't worshiping God. They had different gods. So they go off to an island, and they're now separated by God, and they worship the fish god. And they say, yeah, but way back in history, there was this God of the Bible that did this. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, way back in history, the fish god did this, right? Yeah, if they worship a different god, they're not going to give credit to some other god. They're going to give credit to their God that they're worshiping. That would be one of the reasons why their stories would be different. And they all spoke different languages. I've been blessed to go worship with a Chinese church that did Mandarin, Cantonese, Indonesian church, Bahasa. I just went to Spokane, Washington, and it was a Russian church, over 800 people singing in Russian. It is absolutely amazing. Actually, it was really kind of moving because their music is just different. You can tell when Russians are singing Russian music. It was amazing. And so we are all speaking this different language. I was at the Chinese church there in Dallas, and there was a guy speaking in Mandarin Chinese, and I was just listening because I don't speak Mandarin Chinese. And Richard walks up and he goes, hey, he's speaking Mandarin Chinese. Do you know what he's saying? I said, nope. I said, what is he saying? He said, I don't know. I speak Cantonese. I was like, okay. But there was these 3 different languages being spoken, and then we would all go sit down and have lunch together afterwards. It was so cool. And then to be able to worship with the people in Russian, they gave me a little monitor where a guy was translating the entire time. Songs, the message, everything. You want to know what they were saying in Russian when they were singing worship songs about God? God will destroy the American... No, that's not what he said. He said, they were saying, you are the one that we can open our hearts to. It was amazing to hear that they're saying the same thing. Every single language is saying the same thing. We all worship him. It's just that he gave us a different language. And isn't it cool that, yeah, he gave us a different language so that we can never have the same unity we had before, but it still transcends where we can understand one another. And babies laugh in the same language. Have you ever noticed that? They laugh in the same. You laugh in the same language. It doesn't matter what culture you're from. When somebody laughs, you're just like, they're laughing, they're happy. When they're crying, you know. We all do. There's like a universal language. It's really cool. But they all spoke different languages, so they couldn't have that same unity. There's no way, especially back then, there wasn't all the translation back and forth of the languages, so they couldn't say, hey, he's not telling the truth or something like that. But they all spoke different languages. So the flood stories, even though they are close, are a little bit different, but it's understandable why they would be a little bit different, isn't it? And yet we see them in every culture. Is that evidence that 300 cultures made up the same story with just a few different details? Or is that evidence that there was something that happened that everybody knows about and they're trying to tell people about it? I think it's the latter. That's what we find out in history about the flood. Now, when we talk about the flood in the ground, that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time, looking at the observable evidence. When we talk about observable evidence, I want to show you what we're actually finding. We're going to look at multiple things. We're going to start out with a geological column. When we take a look at the geological column, it actually destroys evolution in about 5 minutes. Okay? Oh, I forgot to bring Bob. Where's Dan? Will you go look at my suitcase and get Bob for me? See, Bob is very important because when I was talking to the Gideons, I used Bob the trilobite. And I thought nothing of this. It's just a little fossil. And the kids loved Bob the trilobite. And so I was telling them that Bob's very simple, he's dumb, he's not complex, and they got very upset with me that I had talked bad about Bob. And they told me I had to bring Bob for ice cream afterwards. So now I use Bob as an example just to help people understand the geological column. The geological column is, thank you so much. I want to introduce you guys to... So I want to introduce you guys to Bob. We'll talk about him here in just a minute. The geological column is basically a history of how things are buried. That's the best way to say it. They're a history of how things are buried. Now, why they're buried that way is another question. There's 2 worldviews, right? Of course, there's Darwinian evolution, and then there's biblical creation, okay? And when you talk about Darwinian evolution, they say it's when they live. So in other words, down at the bottom of the geological column, you have all the simplest little things, like the bacteria, the little bitty crinoids, and then you get trilobites, and you get fish, and then reptiles, or marine, like fish, and then reptiles as you go up on land, and then you get more animals, mammals, humans, and dinosaurs, and all kinds of stuff, right? Okay? So they say it's when they live. The stuff at the bottom lived the longest back, okay? So 500 million years ago for trilobites and things like this. And then as you go earlier and earlier and earlier, you get, dinosaurs, 65 million, 250 million years old. Humans are at the very top, okay? So it's when they lived. Creationists say this is a very different concept. This is very different. The geological column is actually a matter of where they lived. You think about it. If you have a tsunami that happens and it comes across the ocean, what's the very first thing that's going to be buried? All the smallest, little, simplest stuff on the bottom of the ocean. All the little crabs and all the little trilobites and things like this are going to be buried first. As it continues to come across and bring sediment, it's going to bury fish and rays and all this kind of stuff. And then as it goes up on land, it's going to hit all the reptiles and amphibians and things like this. It gets to the mammals and the horses and the dinosaurs and the humans. But it's that same order. It's just a matter of where they lived. It's coming across the ocean and onto the land. It's where they lived. That's what a creationist would say. So same story, same order, different story. Not when they lived, where they lived. Now, let's destroy evolution's very core. With Bob, the most powerful trilobite ever. So this is Bob. He is an actual trilobite that we got from Fossil Era. He's my personal trilobite. I think they're kind of freaky, honestly. It took me a while to actually touch him. I don't know why. Do you guys have roly-poly bugs here? Do you guys know what I mean by roly? Somebody? Okay, yeah.
Wood lice.
Wood lice? Yeah. Is that what they call them? Yeah. Okay, that seems a little grosser now. Okay, that's cool. So a trilobite is basically like the wood lice of the ocean. They're everywhere. I mean, if you want to buy a fossil, these are the cheapest fossils you can find because they're everywhere. Okay? But they're at the very bottom of the geological column, so they should be the most simple, non-complex thing ever. However, in 1974, the year I was born, don't do the math. Don't do it. Okay? In 1974, they had already discovered that the trilobite was amazingly complex. This is what they said. Trilobites may have been superior to current living animals. They had, in principle, perfect vision. They possessed the most sophisticated eye lenses ever produced by nature. They looked like they were designed by a physicist. If evolution is true, this cannot exist down at the bottom. This should not be at the bottom of the geological column. Little Bob is the most powerful fossil in the world because he destroys evolution with one quote. Because he is amazingly complex. Because he was designed by God to be the way he wanted him to be, to do the things he wanted him to do. And that's the key. It's not that he evolved or evolved into something different. So Bob destroys evolution at its very core. So it's not a matter of when they lived, it's a matter of where they lived. Let's take a look, instead of the geological columns, take a look at fossils. When we look at fossils, we have to be somewhat careful in some of the things we say. One thing is that we find marine fossils all over the world, at the very lowest and at the very highest. We see them on the top of the mountains. Now, we have to be a little bit careful. It's the amount of fossils that we find, or it's the number of places that we find them that's key. It's not just that we find the marine fossils at the top of mountains, because if you take a look at this dinosaur ridge in Denver, and so I went to Dinosaur Ridge with Dr. Clary. This is actually an uplift. So this is laid down horizontally, and then it's actually lifted up. So Garden of the Gods, all those rocks were actually laid down horizontally, and because of the forces of the place, it's lifted up. Most people don't understand that. And so when you take a look at this, you can see in the right-hand side over here, this is red rock. Well, this actually is lifted up also. So you're actually seeing some of the youngest rock at the same level as some of the oldest rock because of that uplift. So we have to be a little bit careful because then you could have marine fossils from the lower rock popping up. But it's because of how much we see it that is important. So we find marine fossils everywhere. We find it on the Himalayan mountains and Mount Everest. We find it in the Grand Canyon like we talked about before. We find marine fossils in the Andes Mountains. We found oysters and all kinds of crinoids and little fossil fish and fossils and everything. We find them everywhere. And so marine fossils on the tops of mountains are something that kind of make us go, huh, interesting. And then when we start putting it together with everything else, it starts to paint a picture. Think about these fossils. We find fossils in two different ways. Now, 95% of the fossils that we find are marine invertebrate fossils. In other words, they're in the oceans and they don't have vertebrae. Okay? 95% of what we find is that. So only 5% is actually a vertebrate. And so there's not a massive amount that we're finding. So we have to make our assumptions, we have to make our inferences based on that. So we find fossils in two different ways. Here's the interesting thing. We can find them well preserved and we find them in fossil graveyards. Both can only happen through a global flood. Here's what I mean. When we talk about well-preserved fossils, this is actual evidence of rapid burial. Here's why. Because what happens if you kill something on the side of the road? I mean, assuming you don't pick it up and take it home and cook it. If you leave it on the side of the road, what happens to it? It rots, right? So it decays. It smells. Other animals come and pick at it, right? Okay? Things don't last on the side of the road, right? They'll last a little bit, but they're not going to last very long. They're not going to last millions of years, and they're definitely not going to last to be able to look like this, okay? Now, what about water? Do things last in water? Nope. So they did a study, and I didn't put it in here because there's so many people who are squeamish, and it scares them. Even though it's not horrible, they still get really scared, and so I took it out. So they did a study on pigs. So they take dead pigs, and they put them in these different bodies of water. They covered them with a cage so big sharks and things couldn't get at them. And then they just wanted to see how long it would take for them to just like decay and get eaten by like bacteria and crabs and little fish and just all kinds of little stuff. And so if I was mean, I would show you day 1, and then I would ask you if you want to see day 7. If I was to show you day 7, you would see it is gone. All the bones are laying separated. They're disarticulated. In other words, all the proteins that held them together is gone. They're all just laying there. Things don't last in the ocean. They don't last on land. They don't last in the ocean. So how do you get well-preserved fossils like this? Well, you have to have something that can bury them fast enough so they can't get away and deep enough so they can't survive and nothing else can get to them. Let me say it again. You have to have something that buries them fast enough so they can't get away, and deep enough so they can't survive, and nothing else can get to them. That's how you get this kind of preservation. And we see this kind of preservation. This is really cool. This is pretty good preservation, but it's nothing compared to stuff like this. You think about it. You look at the leaf. You can actually see the little branches of the leaf itself. You actually see the leaf portion. If it sits on the ground for a month, it doesn't fossilize like this, okay? You have to bury it quickly. Same thing with this insect. This dragonfly, look at the detail of the wings. Did that sit around for a year or two before it got buried? No. You wouldn't see that kind of detail. It would decay. It has to be buried fast enough so it can't get away, deep enough so it can't survive. We've got these fish around this palm, okay? And then it gets even better. We get action shots. You know, it's like taking a camera and taking an action shot. You think about it. These guys didn't hang out together. They weren't partying, okay? They were buried fast enough so they couldn't get away, deep enough so they couldn't survive, right? You think about this guy. He didn't even finish his lunch. He's still eating a fish. I had some fish and chips. It did not take me that long to eat, okay? I was pretty good at putting that in my mouth and swallowing, all right? This guy didn't get to finish. Here's this one. I can't use my laser. Right here, that's a baby coelacanth. That's a coelacanth. That's its baby that is being born right now. It was buried fast enough that it couldn't get away and it couldn't finish giving birth to its baby. And it was buried deep enough so neither of them survived. That's how you get well-preserved fossils. There's a saying that I think it's Gary Parker who actually says, he has a book called Creation Facts of Life. And we have a t-shirt that actually says this: floods form fossils fast. Say that 5 times fast. Go ahead. I'm just kidding. You don't have to do that. Floods form fossils fast. Okay? That's how you get that kind of preservation. Now, a global flood is also how you get a fossil graveyard. You think about it. What kind of force would you have to be able to smash everything together, tear it apart, throw it down, put sediment on top of it? You'd have to have something pretty powerful, wouldn't you? And the global flood is exactly what you find. These are just a few of the fossil graveyards that you can find online. There's not a single one of them on there that I didn't find online. Okay? And so these aren't Christian organizations that talked about it. I just found regular conventional scientists talking about fossil graveyards. Okay? I use internet articles because I don't want you to think I don't have any special books. I'm not part of a secret club. Okay? This is stuff you can get the information yourself. And you've got to slog through a whole bunch of evolutionary stuff, but you can get this stuff yourself. Here's just a couple of examples. I think this is a national agate. Yeah, agate fossil beds. They found rhinos, horses, camels, seashells, fish, birds, plants, trees. Do they party together? No. They're smashed together, ripped apart, and they find their bones disarticulated, mixed up together. There's nothing that has the power to do that unless you want to talk about a global flood that actually picks everything up, smashes it against a cliff, some kind of mountain or cliff, and then has sediment buried on top of it. That has the power to do that. Nothing else we know of it can do that. Here's a few other examples. This is the Messel Pit in Germany. So they found all kinds of insects. They buried insects, for heaven's sakes. Hedgehogs, horses, turtles, crocodiles, fish, and birds. All of them. This is one of the most famous pits, and one of the most famous things that we have there in Germany. They actually made stamps out of it. It's so popular. Okay? Now, this is one that I may say wrong, so don't be mad at me. I think it's the Yijiang Formation in China. And so there's birds, fish, lizards, mammals, pterosaurs, so flying reptiles, dinosaurs, clams, shrimps, insects. All these things picked up, smashed together, and buried in sediment. What force on earth has the ability to do that? None. The only cataclysmic or catastrophic event that we know of that could do that is the global flood. This is excellent evidence of the global flood. That's why I say no matter whether you're looking at well-preserved fossils or a fossil graveyard, it's excellent evidence of a global flood. So what about if we move from fossils and we go to rock layers? So I think I've lost. Ooh, can I have that box, Dan? Yeah, that one right there. I didn't think about it. I apologize. I didn't bring all my stuff. So we have rock layers. When we think about rock layers, we think about the Grand Canyon because the Grand Canyon is amazing. It's an amazing icon of evolution, okay? And so when you look at the Grand Canyon, thank you, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. When you look at the Grand Canyon, you can kind of understand why an evolutionist would say things take millions of years. I know some of you are like, oh, but it's true. I mean, when you look at it from their perspective, it kind of makes sense. Because if you look at this a little bit closer, you can see that there's layers. There's big layers. But if you look there, you can see that those big layers have lots of little bitty layers. Each big layer is made up of hundreds of little bitty layers. And conventional science says that each one of those little bitty layers takes like 1,000 years. It can take hundreds to thousands of years to form. So then you say, you've got all these little bitty layers that are hundreds to thousands of years, and then there's a big layer, and then you've got hundreds of big layers. You start adding that up, and you're going to get to hundreds of millions of years to a billion years, right? It makes sense. Well, that's all based on uniformitarianisms. So uniformitarianism says that it's the theory that changes in the Earth's crust during geological history have resulted from the action of continuous and uniform processes. What does it say? It just means that the way it's happening today is the way it happened in the past. That's all it means. The way it happened today, the way it's happening in the past. That's not necessarily true. We didn't really understand that at one point, but we started to find out that there is something different that can cause the geological formations around us. And that was when we saw Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is an active volcano even today. So it's an active volcano. It's erupted multiple times. The largest eruption that it ever had was in May 9th, 1980. And it's in Washington State. It's right up here in the top corner of the United States. And there's several different volcanoes and mountains up in that area. It's a beautiful country, beautiful area country. I say country is in the rural area. It's a beautiful area. But major events happened. We wound up getting many Grand Canyons. We wound up watching as when it erupted, it actually blew out the side of the volcano. And so when it did, see how it blew out this side? It actually came across and wiped out all the flora, all the trees, all the grass, everything. Do you see all this stuff in this lake? That's all the trees that used to be up here. When it erupted, it took all the trees and the lake, Spirit Lake, it was originally a different area, but because of all the stuff that happened, it actually moved to that area. All the trees were there. If you go down to the bottom of the lake, you see all the bark. All these trees have no bark on them. Because as they've rolled around, it's taken all the bark off and it's all gone to the bottom, and which is vegetation. And guess what coal is made of? Vegetation. Okay, so this is one of the things we started looking at, and we started to realize, wait a second, you don't have to have millions of years. This can actually happen in a very short amount of time. So there's Spirit Lake. There's a mini Grand Canyon. We actually watched. So in other words, when I say we watched, I mean we literally watched as a 1/40th scale Grand Canyon was created. We saw all the sediment layers being laid down, and we saw as a mud flow came down through it and made a canyon through it. We literally watched it happen. Now here's the key. I'll show you here in just a minute. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. So the thing is that we started to realize, wait a second, a large catastrophe can cause the same thing. And so, of course, the catastrophe is, it says that changes in the Earth's crust during geological history have resulted chiefly from sudden, violent, and unusual events. Guess what Mount St. Helens was? Sudden, violent, unusual event, right? Okay, that's exactly what it was. So, of course, you can guess there had to have been some sudden, violent, unusual event in the Bible that could cause these kinds of geological formations, the global flood, right? I won't make you yell it out. So this is what we find. We find evidence through the rock layers of the global flood all over the world. So this is actually in England. So this is what I like to call pinstripe layering. You'll notice there's pinstripe layering. It's just straight, flat line, basically, across. Now, the face of it may be jagged, so it looks a little weird, but the actual layering itself is pinstripe. Why is that important? Anybody want to take a guess? Nobody brave. Okay, so pinstripe layering is important because if there was 1,000 years from this layer to this layer, there would be crazy erosion, wouldn't there? You would see this like jagged pattern of erosion. But if it's pinstripe, it means those layers were laid down one after the other. They're laid down in succession, almost like waves coming in, right? And yet this is exactly what we see all over the world. We don't just see it at the Grand Canyon. We actually see it all over the place. This is actually the Grand Canyon. This is an unconformity, so this is kind of cool. And I'll show you, I've got some rocks back there. In the next talk, I'll show you these rocks. So this is an unconformity. So from this layer to this layer, when they date them, they're missing 100 million years. How do you miss 100 million years with a straight line? A pinstripe layering. How do you miss 100 million years? Unless they were laid down and the radioisotope dating is wrong. That's a good reason. Here's another one. This is actually over in Denver when we went to Dinosaur Ridge. We went over, this is something that Steve Austin and Dr. Clary had found. They had written articles about. This is another great unconformity. Because if you look at the top, this is all sedimentation. This is sedimentation that's been laid down by water. This is a granite rock that is not sedimentation. And it's been uplifted. You can see how it's slanted. It's been uplifted. It is very possible, and I have this rock back here I'll show you, that this is Creation Week rock, and that's one of the first, these are the first layers of the global flood. That's pretty cool. And I'll show you those rocks later. So we see this pinstripe layering all over the world. We see it over here in England, in Ireland. We see it in Asia. We see it in America. We see it in Egypt. All these places have the same pinstripe layering when you look at the rock. That should be a good hint. But it's not just that pinstripe layering. It's actually the pattern that we see. Let me show you, because we can actually look at a small section right by water, and then we can go hundreds of miles inland away from all the water, and on a massive scale, see the exact same pattern. See the exact same thing. Take a look at this. The one on the right, this one over here, is 6 tsunamis at a beach that they cut down into the steps. It had covered the steps, so they cut it away to get to the steps. This is the pattern. This is the Grand Canyon, hundreds of miles away, not near any ocean, on a massive scale. It's the same pattern. You see this same type of pattern. That's cool, isn't it? What about this? This is over by the beach. This is the sand. The water has actually manipulated the sand and created an erosion pattern, and yet we can go hundreds of miles away, not near any ocean, and on a massive scale, in the Painted Desert and in the Badlands, we can see the same thing. If we take a look at the beach, everybody used to say that you can't get layering with sand. But you can. This is right by the ocean. It brings in the sand and it layers it. And then as it erodes, it creates this pattern. And yet, if you recall, that's the same pattern hundreds of miles away on a massive scale you see in the Grand Canyon. See, all the pinstripe layering, all the same erosion patterns, everything points to a global flood. There's lots of other things that we can talk about. There's polystrate fossil. Polystrate fossils are easy. There's nothing hard about that. It's just simply a fossil that goes through multiple layers of sediment. So remember, all those little bitty layers takes like thousands of years to create. So if you get through 100 of those layers with a fossil, well, that's 100,000 years. This is a tree. Does a tree last 100,000 years? Nope. So if it goes to 1 million years of strata, was it laid down in 1 million years, or was it laid down quickly so that the tree would have survived? It would have had to have been laid down quickly. Polystrate fossils are excellent evidence. So I told you I would show you the evidence of the Coconino sandstones. So this is cross-bedding. You see this pattern here. This is cross-bedding. It's actually at an angle. So when sediment is laid down, it can be laid down by water or by wind. But it's laid down at a different angle. So the sediment comes up, it starts to go at this angle, and then it'll start to kind of fall over the top. But if it's laid down by wind, it's always at a 30 degree or more. If it's laid down by water, it's 20 to 30 degrees. Okay? It'll be under 30 degrees, most likely very close to 20%. 20 degrees, excuse me. So, when I went to the Grand Canyon, this is us. We were walking down the Grand Canyon, go down the Bright Angel Trail. We were about 1.5 miles. You get down to the Coconino sandstones, and in the Coconino sandstone, oh, that's just a cool picture I put in there. Not bragging, it was a cool picture. So Dr. Thomas actually showed us where in the Coconino sandstones you can actually find that same cross-bedding. Why is that important? Because if I can find cross-bedding, it shows that we can actually figure out, was it laid down by wind or water? Which means we needed to show what the angle was, right? And so this is a picture of me and my wonderful hand modeling, showing you that the degree was actually almost exactly 20%. Or excuse me, 20 degrees, 20%. I'm sorry? Slightly over. You've got good eyes. You have amazing eyes. But yeah, sure, we'll say just over 20. And so what does that mean? It means that it was laid down by water. Which means that conventional science says all the others were laid down water except for the Coconino sandstones. And we've just now proven that the Coconino sandstones were laid down by water, which means every single layer was laid down by water. What does that mean? We talked about it before. It means that the Bible is true, right? So that's the important thing. Here's something interesting. Right afterwards, I fought to the death with a scorpion. I mean, it was really scary. Without my cat-like reflexes, I would have died, I'm sure. But anyway, so I have a question for you. I have a rock here. I just want to ask. I have 2 pounds. Is there anybody is anybody strong here? Oh, you're strong. Wait, right over there. You strong? Okay, come up here. Come up here. I have a challenge for you. Okay, you ready for this? So we went to, come on up. So we went to Sicker Point. And so Sicker Point is also an unconformity. So you can actually look. So you see how all these layers are actually sitting up like this. So it's put down horizontally. All the layers are put down horizontally. Then it's uplifted like this, right? You see that? And right here. But then take a look at the red. This red, I think it's part of the sock sequence. It may not be. I got to go back and look. But it's actually laid down on top of it. So it's actually laid down horizontally again on top of this. There's a guy, Hutton. This is a famous area. And my geologist almost laughed like a little girl when I told him I was going to Sicker Point. And he was like, take a picture of it. I want to write an article on it. So what Hutton said was, well, he had already decided that he wanted to get rid of this whole 6,000 year thing. Okay, he was like, nah, we don't want this. We want millions of years. When he found Hutton's unconformity, he said, hey, it had to have taken millions of years for this stuff to have uplifted, flattened out, and then for the layers to be laid down horizontally on top of it. It had to have been millions of years. But guess what we found? We found with Mount St. Helens, that's easy. You can actually do that through a catastrophic event, a cataclysmic event. So we actually went to Hutton's Great Unconformity and took a look at it, and we did some drone footage and stuff like that. So here's my challenge to you. Are you ready? Are you pumped? Can you give me a... Okay, all right. They love it. So I'm not doing it to be mean. They actually love it when you do this. Okay, I want you to take that and bend it. I'll give you 2 pounds. Just bend that rock. You're not bending it. Well, maybe somebody stronger. Is there anybody stronger? Okay, yeah. All right. Hold on. Let's see. I got some more pounds here. Here's 2 more pounds. If you bend this rock, I'll give each of you 2 pounds. Is anybody catching on that you can't bend a rock? So let me ask you this. What if I was strong enough, and I should have picked a smaller piece if I was going to do this, if I actually was able to break, it would break. It wouldn't bend, right? Because rock is hard, right? Rock is hard, so it wouldn't bend. So actually, it was a trick. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Here, you each get that still because I tricked you. So thank you very much. So rock doesn't bend, right? So how in the world would you get that kind of bend if you look at this? On a massive scale, you have a bend. How would you get that? How would you get this? How would you get that bend there? That's in the Grand Canyon. How would you get this? The sediment layers have to be soft. If the sediment layers are soft, they can bend. They can curve. So they have to be soft before and then curve and then be hardened, right? So that's the key. You can't get curved strata over millions of years. You don't get rock that just slowly bends over time, okay? Now, there is one exception. If you superheat the rock, you can do that. However, the actual consistency of the rock changes. The crystalline features of it changes, and you can actually tell whether it's been superheated. And these are not superheated. So how do you get it? It has to be soft. which means that the global flood would be the only way you could have massive amounts of sediment laid down one on another and then bent or folded. The global flood is the only way that you could do that. So curved strata is a great way. And then real quick, I know I'm running along, and I told you it's going to be long, but let's talk about the sedimentation analysis real quick. Consistent sediment. Now this, I want to show you a picture of my slide on sediment layers from like 2010. Don't laugh, okay? Don't laugh. So this was my little slide, the Tapete sandstone. And so if you take a look, it showed where the Tapete sandstone was in North America. Okay? The problem is that the only way we could tell, the whole concept was, hey, we think we found the same Tapete sandstones in Egypt, and we think we found it in England. Well, since we couldn't really see down into the rock, we couldn't tell because we can only wait and see where it was exposed, and then we could take a look. And that's usually another continent, so we can't really tell where it is in the pattern of the actual thing. So it's really hard. So if we were actually able to look underneath our feet, it would be really cool because we would actually see, kind of like the Grand Canyon, but we need the whole Earth to be the Grand Canyon so that we can see whether it's all the same across continents. Well, that's exactly what Dr. Clary started to do. He was an oil guy before he joined ICR. And what do oil guys do? They drill into rock, don't they? And guess what? They actually notate what kind of rock they drill through. And so he had access to all this data. He started analyzing over 3,000 cores across the world. And this, he has a book and a DVD. He did 3 continents at that time. He's now done 5 continents, and he's working on the 6th Australia. And so he would go in. They would actually analyze sedimentation. And remember, I told you there were 6 mega floods, right? And he said, well, those must have been mega sequences to the flood. These are the 6 mega sequences. And so you're seeing the sedimentation, so it's blue. I don't know why they made it blue. It confuses everyone. But it's blue, and so the sedimentation starts to rise. It gets higher and higher, okay, to the Tejas. The Tejas would actually be the receding phase of the flood. So the water's actually coming off of the land. And so you can actually not only map each sequence, you can actually map what it would look like from day 1 to day 40. So up to day 40, this is the sedimentation that they found, okay? And then you can go from 40 to 150. Now, one of the things you might notice is that, see that big white spot right there? You say, well, it clearly wasn't a global flood if there isn't sedimentation on that big white spot. Have you ever taken a bath when you're really dirty? Don't raise your hand. But if you've ever taken a bath or you've had a kid take a bath and they're really dirty and you drain the water, you get this bathtub ring, right? That's the bathtub ring. So as the water only went 15 cubits up over the mountain. So while it did cover everything and it would have killed everybody, it didn't necessarily bring the sediment all the way to the top. So you would have a bathtub ring as the waters were coming off of the land. And that's the bathtub ring. Same thing here. And here you're seeing that bathtub ring. Okay? And so that's the sedimentation analysis. Now here's the thing. When he actually looks at the 6 mega sequences, it lines up perfectly. So when you go from the Sauk to the Tippecanoe to the Casquias, you've got the flood, and as it's rising, and right after that third one, right into the Absurica, you actually have the arc floating. And then you go into the Zuni, where you're starting to peak, covering everything. And then in the Tejas there, it actually comes off the land, and it's actually receding. And so here's another interesting thing, and I don't put it in here because half the people just kind of give you a glazed look. If you're interested, there is a byproduct of this that they've tracked. It lines up perfectly, so they can actually look at observable evidence and track this actual occurrence right here, this actual flood water, because as the ocean crust is created, it creates a byproduct, and when you track that byproduct, it lines up with this line right here. And so that's one of the reasons why Dr. Clary says that there was part of the water rising was because of the new ocean floor was being created. So we can actually look underneath our feet based off this stuff. And here's the thing. We were driving in Alabama. The first event I ever went to, we flew into Florida. We had to drive to Andalusia, Alabama. It was in the middle of nowhere. I was pretty sure they were going to find their bodies somewhere in the swamps, okay? It was, when I say it was out in the middle of nowhere, I mean like wild animals didn't even want to go there, okay? So we're driving out there, and I remember him telling me, you know, Dave, when I started this, my only thought was, what if I do this and it's not true? What if I do this and all the sedimentation is different everywhere? He's like, I mean, my career's over at that point. I don't know what to do. But the truth of the matter is, what he found was that it's all the same sedimentation, it's all in the same pattern, and it's on all the continents. And that is a global flood. Like I said, he's done 5 continents, working on the 6th, Australia. He may do 1 more. And so that is perfect evidence of the global flood. Last thing real quick is the flood in geological time. This one goes really fast because it doesn't take long to laugh, okay? Let me show you what I mean. When you talk about flood in geological time, this is radioisotope dating. So radioisotope dating basically says you have a radioisotope that you can detect. It actually decays. So they have the parent isotope. It decays into a daughter isotope. And how long it decays is how you determine how old something is. It's that decay rate, okay? There's multiple ways that you're going to find that radioisotope dating doesn't work. The first one is you can actually do multiple ones, like rubidium, strontium, potassium, argon, lead, all these different ones. If the dating method works, every single one should give you the same date. They don't. As a matter of fact, when you turn in a sample, a lot of times on that form, they ask you, how old do you think it is? Like, they're supposed to be telling you that, like how old it is. So they want to know. Why? Because they're going to get multiple rates. They're going to get multiple dates. And they want to know which one's correct. Okay? So here's an example real quick of radioisotope dating. Because when we don't know the actual date of the rock, we get it right every single time. I don't know if you know that. When we don't know the date, we get it right every single time. When we do know the date, we get it wrong. But not just wrong, we get it wildly and embarrassingly wrong. Like Dave on the dance floor wrong. That's how wrong we get it. Thank you for laughing. So if we take a look at the Grand Canyon, this is an easy one. So we don't even have to know the dates, because what we did was we went to the very bottom to the basalt flow there at the bottom. That's the oldest stuff you can find. Then we went to the very top to the basalt, the lava flow. It's the youngest one. So we know that the bottom has to be the oldest, the top has to be the youngest. Easy. Pass, fail test. Okay? So we dated the bottom, 1.111 billion years. Based off uniformitarian processes. Okay, that's cool. Very top has to be hundreds of millions of years younger. It's way up at the top, but we dated it 1.143 billion years old. I don't know if you caught on to that. The newest is actually older than the oldest. Does radioisotope dating work? No, it doesn't. Here's one more example. Mount St. Helens. When we took a look at Mount St. Helens, of course, I told you that it has erupted multiple times. We actually dated it in 1996. And so it had just erupted in 1986. So we knew that it was 10 years old, right? We knew that. We knew the date. It had to be 10 years old. So through the magic of radioisotope dating, we got 350,000 to 2.8 million years old. That's not just wildly and embarrassingly wrong. That is Dave on the dance floor wrong, okay? That's how wrong it is. So we went from 10 years versus 2.8 million years. And yet, whenever we don't know the date of a rock, man, we're dead on every single time. Isn't that amazing? And yet, there's example after example after example of this that shows that radioisotope dating doesn't work. Why is that important? Because remember, I told you that evolutionists use a magical word, deep time, where they'll say, yeah, but given enough time, given millions and billions of years, and this is how they get that millions of billions of years. because everything's millions and billions of years. But if this is wrong, then they don't have given enough time, given millions and billions of years. Now suddenly you realize that creation actually lines up the best with the evidence. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at the flood in the Bible or in history or in the ground, or whether you're looking at radioisotope dating. The global flood actually lines up best with the observable evidence that we see. Let's pray real quick. Father, we just thank you that we can look at this catastrophic flood and know that you have given us provision. You have given us a window to our past. We know that you want us to understand that your word is true. We know that we want to believe that. Some of us want to believe it, some of us don't. But Lord, we know that it's true. And Father, we ask that you would work on our hearts to be able to deal with that on an individual basis. Help us to not only trust you and trust your word, but help us to share that with others. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Nope. Thank you, Dave. All right, so we are going to break now for lunch. I do want to remind you, though, we have the cards back there if you want to ask questions. So they're down there in the basket. Fill out the cards, just put it back in the basket with the pens. As well, we've got a lot of food there. Just have as much as you want, and there's plenty of it. And we're going to take just about an hour or so for lunch. So just if we need to, as far as tables over there, if you want to just eat here or whatever, we could take some of the chairs back over there so you can eat at the tables, or we can just eat here, whatever you guys decide. So, all right.